Hi. Today we run a virus scan on our lives. Now if you're not up to date with the technological lingo of what a virus scan is, I'm not a big technology person either, but I'll give it my best. A virus scan is when your computer sort of looks at its insides to find anything that shouldn't be there. Sometimes stuff from the internet gets on your computer and it kind of ruins your computer and makes it perform less than adequate. Your computer gets sick. The virus scan looks at those things and then it gets rid of them. That's what we're going to do today. You don't need and get rid of it. A virus on a computer, it makes the performance slow and sluggish and it just doesn't do very well. Well, that's what sin is to us. Our performance as disciples of Christ, that's less than adequate when we have the things that we just don't need. In fact, that's what Paul talks about today. Earlier in Corinthians, Paul writes a letter condemning a particular member of the community. Paul admonishes them and calls the Corinthians to do something about a particular member. Says some pretty harsh stuff and speaks in terms of the flesh and the spirit. We hear that wording a lot. Paul addresses the discipline among the Corinthians and speaks regarding to one particular individual. This guy had been breaking Roman and Jewish law, a marriage law. And he said something pretty harsh. He said, hand this man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. It sounds kind of harsh coming from Paul. But what Paul is talking about is this. He says, help this man get rid of his sinful nature. Do something about it and take action. Or in terms of what we're saying, help him get rid of the junk he doesn't need. This word flesh, Paul uses that a lot. I think it's one of the most misunderstood words in our Bible. The Greek word here is sarkos. It's been interpreted to mean the human body, and historically we've hated the human body because of it, but that's a different word. It's been misinterpreted also to mean the natural appetites of a human being. A hunger for food, the libido, a love for another person, but those are different words too. Sarkos just means flesh. But I think in order to get a better understanding of what that word means, we can look at a different English word. Let's look at the word sarcasm. Sarcasm takes its root from the word sarkos, meaning flesh. Sarcasm literally means to tear the flesh. We've all heard that tone, haven't we, the sarcasm? We've experienced that tone in our ears and out of our mouths, that nasty, harsh tone. Not really designed to get a point across, even with emphasis, just designed to kind of dig in. I think we're all probably guilty of it. I mean, after all, we're never sarcastic, right? My goodness. But sarkos, it means flesh. Flesh, something that can be torn into, as we see through sarcasm. Something that's impermanent. Something that does not withstand behavior, not rooted in discipline. Something not to put our faith into. You see what Paul is ultimately referring to when he says the flesh is the drive that causes us to sin. Flesh is our weakness. Flesh is our human frailty. Flesh is our brokenness. And he speaks in terms of different bread. He says to get rid of the old yeast so that the new batch of bread can be made. Sort of shifts the metaphor from a positive note, speaking about the community as unleavened bread, to the community now celebrating the whole Passover festival by maintaining this discipline. Of course, we read in Exodus 12 that only unleavened bread was used during the Passover, except what it means to us, though, is our Passover lamb is Christ. See, it was Jewish tradition to only eat unleavened bread, bread without yeast in it, made flat bread. Kind of a couple of stories where that comes from. It was tradition, the idea that the Israelites coming out of the Exodus just didn't have time to leaven their bread. They were kind of in a hurry running from Pharaoh. So the tradition carried on, although there is also sort of a more practical use that the idea of Passover being a spring festival of newness, they didn't want to use the yeast from last year to kind of profane the bread. Actually, kind of along lines with the interesting story about where we get sushi. Sushi has sort of a mythology behind it too. It was said in southeastern Asia, warriors, possibly samurai, learned to eat raw fish because at night they didn't want to start a fire to cook the fish. They didn't want to give their position away to rivals. Regardless of why, though, Paul says to get rid of the yeast out of the bread, because even a little leavens the whole batch. He says even a little bit of yeast leavens the whole batch. That's the way it is with sin. Whatever might come between us and God, even a little can do so much damage. The problem is, though, we think that we're the exception. We think it won't happen. Gary Richmond was a former zookeeper. And during his time, he noticed a particular behavior with raccoons. Raccoons at about 24 months old would go through this glandular change, and they would suddenly become violent, even toward their owners. So he thought it was important because a 30-pound raccoon is a pretty formidable opponent against a 100-pound dog. He had a friend who had a raccoon, and he wanted to go talk to her about it. Her name was Julie, so he went and told Julie about this, saying, when this raccoon gets old enough, you're going to need to get rid of it. She smiled politely and said, no, this will be different. Bandit would never hurt me. It's different. Well, a couple months later, Julie underwent a massive facial reconstructive surgery. Because sure enough, the raccoon did what raccoons do. It attacked her. She said she would be different, but it wasn't. How often do we say that? It'll be different for me. Sin is sort of like that. It comes in that cute, wrapped up form, and we think, well, maybe a little we can play with it for a while, but a little goes a long ways. Nearly every preventable tragedy that's ever occurred begins with the expression, it's different for me. But it's always predictable. So I invite you to cut out whatever in your life is standing between you and God. Like a little bit of yeast, it can do so much damage to your entire life. A little unforgiving in our hearts can leaven our lives into bitterness and anger. A little jealousy in our lives can leaven our lives into ones of greed and insecurity. A little indulgence in our life can leaven our simple wants and needs into lusts of all kinds. And even a little gossip can leaven our friendships into hatred. Gossip is a powerful leavener, isn't it? That's a powerful yeast indeed. Just a little can do so much damage. As the word sarcasm goes, one word can tear at the flesh. It's in those small things that we do that we can do so much damage. Those small things that we really never think about. There's an interesting story of a man named Jimmy who crossed the entire United States on foot. He walked from New York to San Francisco. And after he got there, he was asked what the toughest part of the trip was. And he said it wasn't the sweltering jungle-like heat of the Midwest or the East. It wasn't scaling the Rockies going across there. And it wasn't walking across this vast, barren land. No, he said the thing that came the closest to defeating me was the sand in my shoes. The sand in his shoes almost defeated him. The little things are what almost defeats us. Well, what are those little things in our lives? The little things that come so close to defeating us. What is our yeast that we have to cut out of our lives? Well, we know the obvious ones. We know things like fear, arrogance, worry, anger, hate, judging, self-righteousness, hypocrisy, envy, selfishness, ingratitude, irresponsibility, thoughtlessness, gossip, lying, blasphemy, criticism, ridicule, discompassionate behavior. We know all of those. Those are the easy ones to think about. They're not easy to get rid of, but those are the easy ones to know to get rid of. But what about the things that aren't necessarily bad? You see, I think in our culture, what sin we're probably guilty the most is the sin of excess. The sin of excess. The good things we have, we get too much of it. We turn money, food, human love, and things and objects into a virus. They become a virus and they become destructive to us. If you're used to too much, you'll want too much. Excess is the seed that germinates into greed. Excess is the seed that germinates into greed, because if we get too much, then we will inevitably want too much. And that's what gets us into trouble. I read an account of some men who, going back to the zoo analogy, would capture these ring-tailed monkeys for a zoo. The tough part is a ring-tailed monkey is one of the most difficult animals to capture. It's very fast and very wily and almost impossible to get a hold of it. But these gentlemen went to Africa and they were talking to a Zulu tribe, and the Zulu tribe says, "Oh, we catch those things all the time. It's really easy, actually." They said, "Well, what's your secret?" They said, "Well, here's what we do. Ring-tailed monkeys love these delicious melons that grow in the tree. So we take a melon and we cut just a little hole in the top because they love to eat the seeds out of these things. And a ring-tailed monkey will go and he'll put his hand in there and grab a big handful of seeds and try to pull it out. But with this big fist full of seeds, he can't get his hand out of the hole now." And they said you don't even have to watch the trap very long. As soon as he gets it, he'll screech and scream and struggle for hours, trying to pull his hand out because he refuses to let go of those seeds. And then inevitably they go up and they nab him. That's the way it is with excess with us. We refuse to let go of it and we end up getting nabbed. So this week I invite you to do something. I invite you to sit down for a couple of minutes and make a list. Just sit down and write a list of all the things you don't really need in your lives, that you don't really need. Just sitting down and writing it can mean so much, so we can begin to separate ourselves from it. This is our virus to our computer. This is our unwanted yeast to our bread. And we think, well, what do we do with our excess then, now that we have this excess stuff? Well, if we have excess prejudice or excess anger, we give that to God. God will take that. What about our stuff, though, our excess stuff? Well, I know there's a house just down the street that could use some excess stuff of ours. And we know all of the amazing ministries our apportionment dollars go to. There's some things in other countries that could use our excess. So I invite you to get rid of your excess. And as we gather at the table today, I also invite you to think about what it means to eat this bread. What it means to have your own bread without the yeast. What it means to get rid of the things, the junk that you just don't need. And I also ask you to meditate on these words by a guy named James Melvin Washington. He prayed to God and said this amazing prayer. He said, "Blessed Spirit, give me the strength to resist my resistance to you." Amen.